We read The Color Purple. I'm Tigger.
I'm Mariana.
I'm Kylie.
I'm Wes.
I'm Abigail.
So to start off, we saw a lot of similarities between The Color Purple and The Narrative of Life of Frederick Douglass. The first thing we saw was a big relation between when Frederick Douglass fought back against Mr. Covey and kind of like found his inner self and like stood up for himself and didn't like being treated like a brute anymore. And this was kind of like Sophia and how she, in the book, was really one of the strongest characters. Like, she didn't let herself be treated like Celie did. She like didn't when people would try to abuse her, like she didn't let them like hurt her. Like she would fight back with Harpo.
So we thought that kind of was a theme of violence throughout both books, and it's clear that the African Americans during this time faced a lot of violence, and you get this perspective from not only Frederick Douglass but also when Celie is abused multiple times, physically, emotionally, sexually even, and Celie struggles to fight back, and she has to look to other characters in the book, such as Sophia and Shug, to really find the strength to fight back.
Yeah, one thing in Frederick Douglass is that I feel like the climax of that book is when he stands up to Mr. Covey, when he fights back for his own freedom, which is very similar to this book. Celie finds the strength through the characters like Sophia and Shug and even her sister Nettie to stand up for her own self. And then once she does this, her whole life kind of changes. Like, she comes back, her husband, Mr. Blank Albert,
starts respecting her.
Yeah, he starts respecting her, and then everything kind of changes after that one point. So
that's also kind of like Mr. Covey, because remember when Frederick like fought back, then like Mr. Covey wasn't as like aggressive against him. He was kind of like, and he gained a new like respect for him.
I'm pretty sure he never got beat again after that.
He never got beat again. And then a quote that shows Sophia fighting back was, "They fight, he tried to slap her. What'd he do that for? She reached down and grabbed a piece of stove wood and whacked him across the eyes. He punched her in the stomach." So that just kind of justifies that she was really fighting back.
I have one more quote about just showing how Celie changes throughout the book. So, like, she goes from, like, being small and invisible to, like, showing herself, which is similar to Frederick Douglass. In the beginning, she goes, "But I don't know how to fight. All I know how to do is stay alive." Mm-hmm. And then she says this again, "I don't say nothing. I think about Nettie dead. She fight, she run away. What good it do? I don't fight. I stay where I'm told, but I'm alive." Basically all she cares about is that she's not dead. And then at the end of the book, we see her, caring more about whether she's alive or dead. She, similar to Frederick Douglass, like, she kind of gains her freedom.
Her life. She discovers herself.
Yes.
Yeah, and I also wanted to point out that Mr. Blank and even his son Harpo, they have this perspective on pride and like men's pride at this time, and the quote is, this is Mr. Blank saying, "You ever hit her?" And Harpo looks down at his hands. "Nah, sir," he says, low, embarrassed. "Well, how you expect to mind her then? Wives is like children. You have to let 'em know who got the upper hand. Nothing can do that better than a good sound beating." So obviously, like, that struck out.
And like also what we can see between the two books is that, like, when they fought back, there was consequences for both of them. So you can see how, like, the government was really, like, kind of, like, awful during this time period. So, like, when Sophia fights the mayor, like, she ends up in jail, and kind of, like, when Frederick fights back, like, he ends up having to, like, leave and stuff. So it's, like, there's never, like, justification from them fighting back. Like, it just takes a lot of work.
Yeah, and they both reminded me, like, of Thoreau, definitely, when Sophia ended up in jail because they were fighting for what they believed in, and even though there were, like, serious consequences, like, they wanted people to understand that, like, there needed to be action taken against.
Well, I feel like in both situations it's really interesting, especially in The Color Purple, how she really feels that the actions against her were justified initially because, you know, when you're looking at it, you could say these are really normal things, but and that she's getting beaten for, but like she believes that it's wrong what she's doing. So in this quote, she says, "He beat me today because he say I winked at a boy in church. I may have got something in my eye, but I didn't wink. I don't even look at men's." And, you know, winking at someone... Oh, is it done?
No.
Oh, well, winking at someone usually would be, like, a normal action, but she's beaten for that, and that's really, like, not fair.
Yeah, I feel like another big similarity I saw between like both narrators, Frederick Douglass and Seeley, are that they're very critical of white people. Frederick Douglass's case, he's basically targets his book towards the white South and tries to get their attention and like see the brutality of the slaves at that time period. And I think that this like really parallels to that in the sense that Seeley tries to show, like, she's also very critical of white people.
And also relating it to Thoreau, like Leslie said. I remember there was a quote that came from Thoreau that said, a vote is not enough. Like, a vote does nothing when you're working against slavery. And I think that the characters like Sophia really, like, show this by fighting back. Like, that's doing something more. Like, not, like, rioting, but, like, you're just going against what you're believing. You're, like, making, like... taking action, not just doing a vote. So I think that like relates to a lot of what Thoreau believed.
Okay, we are talking about themes now. One theme that I found to be prominent in this book was how she talks about religion. In the very beginning of the book, before it even...
The preface. Right?
Yeah, the preface. Wait, let me find it.
Whatever else The Color Purple has been taken for during the years since its publication, it remains for me the theological work examining the journey from the religious fact to the spiritual that I spent much of my adult life prior to writing it seeking to avoid.
Yes, she goes, more than 30 years later, it still puzzles me that The Color Purple is so infrequently discussed as a book about God versus the God image. After all, the protagonist Seeley's first words are, "Dear God." Everything that happens during her life, spanning decades, is in relation to her growth in understanding this force. So basically, in the beginning of the book, she sees God as this image of, like, a white man with a long beard, like, that people worship every Sunday. They try to find him. And that doesn't really, like, fit her life, I feel like. And then at the end of the book, we see her talking to Shug, and Shug starts talking about how that isn't truly the image of God. God is like what we see in nature. She brings up like the color purple, and that is, God is like not a person. He's not like, she's like, he doesn't have eyes. He's not a thing. He's just kind of there.
And
I don't know.
And I think that I found this quote, and she says, "Dear God, I am 14 years old. I have always been a good girl. Maybe you can give me a sign letting me know what is happening to me." And I think that it's really, like, interesting how, like, she all this bad stuff has been going on to her, and she's still kind of, like, looking to God. Like, she knows that, like, there is something out there. Like, it's kind of like her sanity in a way, like writing letters to God. Like, it's helping her, like, kind of cope over whatever things
I was gonna
going
say
on.
the same
like
thing.
a relief.
That it's the only way she knows how to express herself. For at least the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
She writes every letter, "Dear God."
Yeah, and then, but then we see at the end, she starts writing to Nettie. She goes, "Dear Nettie, I don't write to God no more, I write to you." I think that's just, like, her how she changes.
I think that, like, a lot of the characters in the book, like, kind of, like, she never had, like, a female role. So, like, a lot of the females, like, Shug, like, have changed her opinion about God. And, like, she doesn't really know what to, like, listen to because she always believed in God. And then Shug kind of came in and was like, it's not really what you think.
Yeah, and that relationship between women is also another huge theme throughout the book. not only with Shug but also with Sophia.
Yeah, and you notice throughout the whole book that like women are like scared of men, and so like when it's important for them to stand up for them. And there's a quote that says, "He beat me today because he say I winked at a boy in church. I may have got something in my eye, but I didn't wink. I didn't even look at men's. That's the truth. I look at women though because I'm not scared of them. Maybe because my mama cussed me to think." So like it basically is showing how like how scared women are of men, and like I think that's a really big thing throughout the book, because if women stood up for themselves more, then the story would
but
change.
I also think that you can't generalize that, because I think the author purposely put in Sophia and Shug to show that like there were women who were strong and were able to stand up for themselves, and that's what Celie needs to, or she does actually learn from, that she needs to have a voice. She needs to
like good influences on her.
She relates this to the idea of like, I don't know, when she and Shug are talking about it, Shug says, they're talking about God. She goes, "Not vain, just wanting to share a good thing. I think it pisses God off if you walk by the color purple in a field somewhere and don't notice it." And then, "What'd it do when it pissed off?" I asked. "Oh, it makes something else. People think pleasing God is all God care about, but any fool living in the world can see it always trying to please us back." So what's her name? Celie is Celie is kind of like relating God to this idea of like love, and I think Shug introduces her to this. She goes, "You mean it want to be loved just like the Bible say?" And we see like this idea of love throughout Celie and Shug, and Celie and Nettie, because they talk about how Nettie was the first person that she ever loved, and then she gets beaten down by Mr. Blank, kind of loses that sense, and then finds it again within her relationship with Shug.
Yeah, and to bring it back to feminism, I found a really interesting quote, and it was with Mr. Blank. She says, "Harpo asked his daddy why he beat me. Mr. Blank say, 'Cause he my wife, plus she's stubborn. All women good for. He don't finish, he just tuck his chin over the paper like he do. Remind me of Pa." And I think this quote's really important to look at, because Mr. Blank is he has no way to justify his actions towards her. He's just saying, "Because you're my wife," like that's the normal thing to do. And she compares him to her dad in his actions of like when he beat her, and it's really interesting because this could relate like why she's so afraid of men, like why the connection just isn't there.
And then going back to the God thing, I feel like I can relate this to like even like my life in a way, because like current day, because even though I'm not a really religious person, when you're put in a time of like struggle, you're kind of like, please God, like you want to believe that there's something like a lot bigger that can help you. And I think that writing to God, like in her situation that she's in, like it makes perfect sense. Like she doesn't have anyone else that would be her, like who she would look up to besides God. I think that the changing image of him also really reflects that, because it starts off as a white man and then it changes to like nature, and it's just kind of like more like calming and like something that would relax you.
Another big theme of this, kind of going off of that, is forgiveness. Like we see her come back to Mr. Blank. She forgives him, and they actually become really good friends. And then Shug decides to go away, and she has very big problems with that. But then when Shug's coming back, she goes, "If she come, I be happy. If she don't, I be content." And then I figure this is the lesson I was supposed to learn. And that's at the very end of the book, and I think that shows that this is the lesson that Celie learned. Like she she went through all these hardships, and then she found someone, but that person left, and she had all these people betray her throughout her life, and then she says this, and I don't know.
I feel like that, going back on what you said, like how she always forgives people, I feel like that's kind of like a sign that she has lost like so many people, and she's never really had like a strong relationship except for with Nettie and when she got separated from her. So I feel like that's kind of, she's trying to like hold on to something, because if she like will disown someone or hold a grudge, like she's not gonna have anybody. So I feel like that's really symbolic.
Yeah, I agree with what Wesley said, and I was gonna say that she's also very submissive to Mr. Blank, and it's not until she gets all like support from the woman in her life that she's able to stand up to him and tell him how she really feels about the way he's been abusing her, and also that the men throughout the story tend to be characters that are very violent, and I thought that was an important something to point
She
out.
like has all these strong relationships with like specifically women. Like she's a lesbian. Shugs her she becomes friends with Sophia. Like her sister is Nettie. She kind of builds this bond with all these women figures.
Yeah, she has a lot stronger bonds with women.
And it's almost that like she didn't really have a choice in that because she didn't have any strong male figures in her life, like positive figures in your life.
Yeah.
Other than
Bringing up like education, I feel like that was a really strong theme we see throughout this book. She brings up how important it is. She's writing as an uneducated woman.
Yeah, especially in the beginning. I remember when her and Nettie were still together. Nettie was going to school and so was Celie, but then Celie was taken out because she was told she was dumb. And I remember that Celie was struggling and like really trying to educate herself because she thought that the only way to escape was if you were educated and if you knew,
Yeah, and I feel like also like education, it goes with like her experience. Like she hasn't, like when she sees Sophia fighting back and stuff, it's almost like she gains a new appreciation for like what she could do, and I feel like if she was to be more educated, she would know more about like what to do and in those situations and how wrong they are. And like I also feel like her uneducation, her not being educated like influences some of her actions. Like even if she gets jealous, like telling people to like beat each other up, like yes, like it's understandable with her situation, but I feel like I don't know, it all comes back to how she's not educated.
I found a quote when Nettie said, "The world is changing. It is no longer a world for just boys and men," when telling Tashi's father why women's education is so important. And like they were finally realizing that like if they wanted to like get ahead and like stop letting these abusive men in their life like kind of control them, then they needed to like be educated. And it's kind of like Frederick Douglass, like he knew once he was educated, he had the power to kind of escape. Like that's when he escaped.
That was his point. Like,
A good quote is when in one of Nettie's letters she goes, "Well, I read and read until I thought my eyes would fall out. I read where the Africans sold us because they loved money more than their own sisters and brothers, how we came to America in ships, how we were made to work. I realized I was so ignorant, Celie. Oh, Celie," and then later she says, "Oh, Celie, there are colored people in the world who want us to know, want us to grow and see the light." Just like Frederick Douglass, almost when he's like looking at the sailing ships, like because he's educated, he knows what that like where the ships are going, what that means.
Yeah, and also just one more thing of Frederick Douglass is we talked about the power that the white slaveholders had over the slaves and how they like tended to abuse the power, and I find the same thing happens with men in this story. Like when they receive the power that they have over women, they're literally abusing it and like abusing the woman. And I think that it shows that like in a lot of different circumstances power can be abused.
Yeah.
And that's when Mr. Blank changed at the end, because he knew that she knew she had power. She could leave him in a minute, and he knew that he needed to treat her differently or else she would leave him.
And it's really interesting how Celie, when she's taken out of school, it's because she's pregnant by her dad again, but she really tries to protect Nettie from that happening because she really sees the value of education and what it's bringing to Nettie's life, and she really wants
Nettie's
her
potential.
to succeed in that.
So now I want to talk a little bit about the symbols, and one major symbol that we thought was important in The Color Purple was sewing, and more specifically the quilt that Celie and Shug are working on, especially when Shug is sick in the house. So in the beginning, or at first, sewing is more considered like a woman's work and more of a hobby. But when she starts, I think it's sewing and knitting, or is it just sewing? Sewing with Shug and making the quilt, it kind of brings them together.
Yeah.
And
Also, like a little bit before, so when Sophia and Celie were like Celie gave advice to what was his name, Harpo, and then like Sophia found out and got really angry. They decided to like sew a quilt, which like represents like unity and like them like coming together. It's like kind of like forgiveness, and like sewing is like putting things together, so like relates.
yeah, I agree with Tigger. And also, so she goes to Tennessee and she starts her own business off sewing. And I think that kind of just shows the progression that she actually went through in the book, where at first she's, not really, she's a little bit lost and she doesn't really know who she is and like how to take control of her life. And finally she's able to start her own business off of it, start profiting. And I think at one point she's talking about sewing with Mr. Blank and Shug, and they're at a table, and she says that everything finally, for the first time in her life, feels right.
Like, I feel like it gives her some sort of a sense of empowerment. Like, she feels like she's accomplished something and that she's not being dictated by a man. So, like, she's actually doing something good for herself and, like, woman's.
And to add to that, it's kind of making up for the lack of education that she had and making her really empowered. It's something that, like, she can do to make herself feel better and, like, I don't know, like, something that she's doing for herself and that she's, like, accomplishing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And also, the fact that like Celie started the pants sewing business is like a really is like a really big like part of like how like it turns it from like kind of just like something that women do, almost like a chore, into something that's like empowering and like economically prosperous.
And also, they saw pants as like only something men wore, not like something women would wear. So it's kind of like
Gender roles.
Yeah, like gender roles and like that kind of theme.
Okay, another interesting thing that is like makes this book kind of stand out is first of all the fact that it's written in letter format, and she assigns every letter like at first like dear God or whatever, and then she also speaks very informally, like she doesn't speak like an educated woman because she isn't, and she refers to her husband as Mr. Blank, which is kind of strange. We don't know why she does that.
Yeah.
I feel like we
I'm
think
not really
she
sure
does.
why she
We're
does
not
that.
exactly sure, but I think we feel like it's because she can't really like see him for like not like a real person, but she can't really look at him in the way that
Married woman should look at her
Yeah.
husband. Yeah. I think it kind of demonstrates the levels of separation and like not connection that they have.
She also refers to her husband as Mr. Blank, not
Yeah.
like most people call their husband by their first name. But then at the end of the book, we see her finally call him Albert, which is when we find out his name.
yeah.
Yeah, and like going with how they don't have any connection. I remember this one part where they're like sitting across the table and then they made eye contact, and it was the closest I've ever felt to him. It was like the best connection. That eye contact, which is obviously not that big of a
Yeah.
deal in the grand scheme of things. So.
Mm-hmm.
Also, back to the idea of letters, like she, this book didn't have to be written in letter format. She could have told her story like through just writing, but I feel like the letters allow it to see through her perspective versus her sister's perspective, and allow her to like show her views very personally, as
Yeah.
if she's writing like personally to someone.
Yeah.
And it also kind of shows the idea of like communication because she is writing it to someone. It's like addressed to someone.
Yeah.
So it's the
Yeah.
idea that these letters are being
It makes
have
it
a
a little bit
purpose.
more real.
yeah.
It's
Like
like you're reading someone's own personal thoughts.
It's like a diary kind of. Like you,
Yeah.
you feel like it's like
Yeah.
very personal and
Shows her journey.
In the letters, you can really see the progression of who she's writing to, which kind of can change the tone of her writing. So initially, she's writing to God, but it's a different God than who she's writing to, like at the end of the book or in the middle of the book, because her perspective on God changes.
Yeah, it definitely shows her perspectives.
And another thing I wanted to point out that I thought was pretty important was how Mr. Blank was initially going to marry her sister, but when when that didn't go through, she was kind of like the backup or the second choice, which can also create that disconnect between them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's a good
true.
point.
That's a good point. Yeah, and also speaking about perspective in the letters, there's a huge difference between when you're reading Nettie's letters because she's educated. She has much better grammar, spelling, and then when you go back and you read Celie's, you notice how much of a difference education made in the letters.
Yeah.
And that can just emphasize like overall the like what education means in their lives, like how much it can really affect them and like what she was really lacking there and how she made up for that.
And lastly, I feel like we brought this up before, but the color purple is just really, it's a really big theme, not only just because she sees God as like the color purple, but like it's her favorite color, and I remember she asked
For the purple dress.
yeah, for the purple dress and
God
the
is
shoes.
definitely a motif.
And
Like she's a big
yeah.
Mhm.
And I just think it like, I don't know, like it gave her like inner strength, like I don't know, like she found like nature in it, and I think that it just like, I don't know, I think it's a really good idea and theme in the book.